Today we're going to be looking at the structure of the heart and blood flow throughout the body. These are the key words associated with today's lesson. We're going to be referring to the pericardium, which is the membranous sac that surrounds the heart, the cardiac muscle, arteries, veins and capillaries, the left and right atrium, the left and right ventricles, semilunar valves, atrioventricular valves, aorta, superior and inferior vena cava, and the pulmonary arteries and veins. This is the learning objectives associated with this lesson. As you can see, there are more words than was on the key words list, so please make sure that you pay attention to them. And please make sure that you read the textbook and complete the associated pages in your class booklet. Alright, so we're going to be looking at the components of the circulatory system to start with. First of all, obviously we have the heart, and you'll notice here that we have coloured in one side blue and one side red, and of course that is to denote deoxygenated blood on this side and oxygenated blood on this side. We also have blood vessels that connect the heart to the rest of the body. And of course, flowing through all of that is the blood. And just as a reminder, blood is made up of erythrocytes, leukocytes, thrombocytes, and plasma. When we're looking at the structure of the heart, we need to notice that it is a double pump. So this side here that's coloured in blue, even though it's on your left, we refer to it as the right side of the heart because it's as though we're looking at a patient. So the right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body. And it does that from the head and the upper part of the body. And you can see those arrows moving down into this chamber here. This is coming from the superior vena cava. Now, superior means above, so we're above the heart. And vena cava is the largest vein in the body. So deoxygenated blood is coming from the superior vena cava into this chamber here, the right atrium. And it's also coming from the body up through here. And because it's below the heart, it's the inferior vena cava. So both of those blood vessels combine to form one, and they meet in the right atrium. When blood fills up the right atrium, it flows down into this chamber here, and this is the right ventricle. And you can see that it almost looks like a V shape here, so this is the right ventricle. When this chamber fills, you can see that the wall of the ventricle squeezes in, and that pushes blood out to the pulmonary circuit. We should notice that the pulmonary circuit is taking blood away from the heart, and of course the word pulmonary we associate with the lungs. So this, the right side of the heart is taking deoxygenated blood to the lungs through both those sides, to the right and left lungs, to go through gas exchange and drop off that carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. Once that blood has become oxygenated, it will then return to the left side of the heart, here and here, in the pulmonary vein. So the pulmonary vein enters this small chamber at the top, and this side is red. So this is the left atrium. It flows down into the left ventricle. And what you see happening here is this blood is squeezed out of the left ventricle, and it moves through the largest artery in the body, the aorta, and that will stretch up towards the head and the neck, and it will also bend over and go down towards the rest of the body. Now, I mentioned in the key words there's this thing called the pericardium. This is what it is here. It's this membranous sac that encases the heart. Now, it plays a really important function. The pericardium is actually there to stop the heart from overstretching. and it also allows that recoil and helps the heartbeat occur. Okay, so as I described before, the heart has 4 main chambers. These are the left and right atria, so that's the left atrium with the oxygenated side, the right atrium on the deoxygenated side. These chambers receive blood from veins. As we flow down onto the right and the left side, we have ventricles. And the job of the ventricles is to pump blood out of the heart. Now, we have this dividing wall between the left and the right side, and that performs a really important function. This is known as the cardiac septum, similar to the septum that you have in your nose. So it separates out the left and right sides of your nose. This will separate out the left and right sides of the heart, and its important function is to prevent the mixing of blood. So we don't want deoxygenated blood mixing with oxygenated blood, because that would reduce the amount of oxygen going to the body. Okay, so just as a summary of what we've learned so far, this chamber on the right hand side, your left, remember it's the patient's right, is the right atrium. We then flow down then we have the left atrium on the other side. We then flow down to the ventricles. So this is the left ventricle, the right ventricle, and this dividing wall is called the cardiac septum, and the muscle is cardiac muscle. Now, we haven't talked about these before, but you will have noticed that you have these valves at certain points in the heart. So there are 4 main valves in the heart. The one on the right hand side is between the atrium and the ventricle. So a simple term for that is the atrioventricular valve. The proper anatomical name for the ventricle here is the tricuspid valve. Okay, so the tricuspid valve has 3 folds that make up this valve, hence tri. And on the left-hand side, again, is between the atrium and the ventricle. So commonly known as the atrioventricular valve, but the proper name for that is the bicuspid valve. And the reason it's the bicuspid valve is because it has 2 folds. Leaving the heart from the right and left ventricles, we move out through an artery. So this is going out through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and this valve here is called the pulmonary semilunar valve. This valve here is found at the start of the aorta, so it's called the aortic semilunar valve. Now, a really important function of valves is that they prevent the backflow of blood. So blood can only flow in the direction shown by the arrows, it cannot go backwards, and that's a really important function of valves in the heart. Now, when we look at this diagram of the heart, and we can see the tri and bicuspid valves between the atria and the ventricles on the left and the right, and we can also see the semilunar valves. We never have both sets of valves open at the same time. So when the tri and bicuspid valves are open, the semilunar valves are closed. Similarly, when we are pushing blood out of the ventricles towards the arteries, the semilunar valves are open, but the atrioventricular valves are closed. And again, the function of this is to prevent the backflow of blood. So as I've mentioned before, the atrioventricular valves are properly known as the bi and tricuspid valves. And you can see that there are these heartstrings here. Now, the proper name for them are the cordae tendineae, and that just basically means fibrous tendons. And what they do is they hold the heart valves in place, and they prevent them from losing their shape. So it's a really important function, and as you can see on this side, the right atrium, blood is flowing down the way, and when it's going through the artery, blood is flowing up through that blood vessel. Similarly, on the left hand side, blood flows from the left to the left atrium to the left ventricle down the way, and then it flows up through the aorta through that semilunar valve. Okay, this is just another view of the valves, just to give you an idea of the anatomy, because often we show you these cartoon diagrams and they're not essentially like that. Again, the tri and bicuspid valve, so this is the right hand side tricuspid valve because we have 1, 2, 3 folds. Bicuspid valve, sometimes known as the mitral valve, on the left, and that has 2 folds, hence the names. Here we can see the semilunar valves. Okay, so now we're just going to be looking at that blood flow through the heart, just to make sure that you understand how it works. On this cartoon diagram, just for simplicity, I've just drawn it as a box here. So we have the right atrium receiving blood from the vena cava, or the inferior vena cava, and the superior one, to be more precise. Blood flows into the right ventricle. It then moves to the pulmonary circuit through the pulmonary artery. Gas exchange occurs at the alveoli in the lungs. Blood will then return to the left side of the heart in the pulmonary vein. It's fully oxygenated, hence the red colour. It enters the left atrium, flows into the left ventricle, through the aorta, and it drops that oxygen off around the body, and the circuit is runs through again. Here I have more of an anatomically correct diagram, but as you can see, it's the same circuit, it's just presented slightly differently. Okay, so again, another diagram. This is just to show you that we are incorporating the heart valves in this blood flow diagram, and it's just to draw your attention to the fact that these blood vessels go to specific organs, and because they are associated with specific organs, they have the start of the name which denotes that. So pulmonary we associate with the lungs, hepatic with the liver, renal with the kidneys, and so on. So just to summarize what we have learned again, blood that blood that is low in oxygen is received by the right atrium from the inferior and superior vena cavae. Blood will then go to the pulmonary circuit to become oxygenated. It comes back from the heart, back from the lungs towards the heart, oxygenated through the pulmonary vein. It then enters the left atrium, the left ventricle, and that blood is pumped out to the entire body through the aorta. Now, you will have noticed that the right ventricular wall is significantly thinner than the left ventricular wall. And the reason for that is because the right side of the heart only pumps blood to the lungs. Now, if you think about the location of the lungs and the heart, they're right next to each other, so you really don't need a large amount of force to push that blood there. So the heart is much thinner on the left ventricular side. However, on the right ventricular side, but on the left ventricular wall, it's significantly thicker. It's about 2 to 3 centimeters thick. The reason for this is because the left ventricle has to push that blood with incredible force around the entire body. So it needs a lot of muscle to do that. Okay, so here we're just showing the positioning of the arteries and the veins. So the green ones, we're showing blood vessels that are moving towards the heart. So we've got a vein entering the left side of the heart. So this is the pulmonary vein coming from the right lung, and the pulmonary vein coming from the left lung, and they meet in the left atrium. The inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava, they meet in the right atrium. Now, what these have in common is that they are both veins. So veins will enter the heart, whereas on the other side, when you've got the pulmonary artery leaving and you've also got the aorta leaving, so arteries move away from the heart. Okay, so a little mnemonic to help you understand that. Veins enter the heart, arteries leave. So veal. Okay, so here's a diagram that matches your work booklet. See if you can label these structures based on what we've learned so far. Once you've had a go, unpause the video and we'll go through the answers. Okay, so hopefully that you were able to go through the work booklet and successfully identify the majority of these structures. This is them in order. Now, the ones that you may have struggled with would be the apex of the heart. So this is the pointed part of the heart. So when you're looking at a heart, the point at the bottom between the left and the right side is called the apex. Remembering the cardiac septum is that thick dividing wall of cardiac muscle between the left and the right. And the fibrous cords, or the chordae tendineae, are the strings that are attached to the valves. Okay, so now that we've looked at the anatomy of the heart, we're now going to take a look at the cardiac flow through the heart. So what we've got here is an animation that shows the cardiac rhythm. So if I just pause this here, let's just focus on this picture or this animation of the heart. As we move forward, you can see that the blood is flowing from the atria on both the left and the right side into the ventricles. Now, as that's happening, the tri and the bicuspid valves are open, but the semilunar valves are closed. Remembering that the function of valves is to prevent the backflow of blood. That's exactly what we want. So when the bottom two chambers are filled, what starts to happen is the walls of the ventricles contract and it pushes open the semilunar valves. The atrioventricular bi and tricuspid valves remain closed, and that blood is pushed out of the heart. So if I show you that animation the whole way through, just a couple of times for you to be able to notice what's going on, you should be able to see that flow. So what we have is the opening and closing of the valves to control that blood flow, and the yellow arrows that you would have seen there, these are to show the contraction of that muscle. Now, as we're looking at that, if we look over here at this diagram, we're going to be looking at the red line this on the graph. Now, as we progress through, we are now at the start of the ventricles, so these yellow arrows are showing that the ventricles are going to start contracting. If you go back and look at this graph, the red line, you should see that it's actually starting to push up, and that the pressure increases quite rapidly. And this is because, remember, there's an inverse relationship between pressure and area. So as the area decreases, the pressure will increase, forcing that blood out and into the arteries. When that the blood is fully out of the ventricles, the chambers, the ventricles start to relax, and the pressure will decrease, allowing blood to flow back in again. So again, if I just run that animation, and you can look at both sides and you can see what's happening there. Now, when we look at the cardiac rhythm of the heart, what we're actually looking at is the differences in pressure. Okay, so you'll see these words lighting up in white. We have systole and diastole. So systole and diastole refer to the pressure of blood in the heart and also in the blood vessels. So systole is when we have contraction, and diastole is when we have relaxation. So if you look at when the word systole is in yellow, we can see, in white, we can see the yellow arrows pushing up on the ventricles. And when it's diastole, those arrows aren't there anymore. So what we're showing is relaxation and contraction of the heart, which leads to changes in pressure. Okay, so now we've had a look at the cardiac cycle. We have understood that the heart is a double pump. It receives deoxygenated blood on the right side, your left of the heart. The top chamber is the right atrium. Blood flows from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Blood will then be pushed out from the right ventricle through the semilunar valve through the pulmonary circuit. So because we are taking blood away from the heart, it is an artery. So this is the pulmonary artery taking deoxygenated blood to the left and the right lungs. Blood will then become oxygenated. Blood will then enter from the pulmonary vein here and enter into the left atrium. Blood will then flow from the left atrium over the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Blood is then squeezed out through the left semilunar valve, through the aorta, and oxygenated blood will then move around the body. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. Hopefully you should have a good understanding of the basic anatomy of the heart, and you should be able to describe blood flow from the right side of the heart to the lungs, back to the left side of the heart, and around the body. Okay, your task for today is to read textbook pages 109 to 112 and complete booklet pages 26 to 28. Thank you.